Hello everybody, welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining us today. So in our session today, we'll be talking about how to write and submit a case to the TCJ Compact Case Competition. We'll also provide some author tips, talk through the benefits of compact cases, and share with you Emerald's useful case writing resources. So I just want to start with a couple of housekeeping items. The webinar today will last an hour, but we will be recording it, so feel free to share with colleagues when we send that around to you. There is time for a Q&A at the end, but if you want to ask questions as we're going along, please feel free to put those in the question panel, which you'll find on the right-hand side of your screen in the GoToWebinar viewer. My name's Andrea Longrig, I'm a marketing manager at Emerald Publishing, and I'll introduce you to our presenters for today. So first we have Rebecca Morris, who's the editor-in-chief of the Case Journal, and we also have Juliet Harrison, who is our Emerald Cases lead. So first I'm going to hand you over to Rebecca, and I'm just going to share some slides. So can you see that?
I can. Good morning, everybody. I hope you're fine. I guess it's morning here in the United States. It's probably a different time where you are. But I'm really happy to be with you this morning because I get to talk about something that I care a great deal about, and that is writing cases. It's always fun to talk about how we go about it. I am the editor-in-chief of the Case Journal, and I'm going to start by giving a little background on the Case Journal itself, and then we'll get into the meat of the session on how to write compact cases and get ready for the competition. So if we can go to the next slide. I have some fast facts about the journal. It's the official journal of the Case Association, and the Case Association used to be called the New England or the Eastern Case Writers. And so we are typically headquartered in the upper New England states in the United States. The association typically meets with the Eastern Academy of Management in May. And the reason I highlight that is that it's going to be a virtual conference. And so if you wanted to attend this year, you could participate from wherever you are and would have the benefit of getting feedback on your cases in May. So look for that as announcements come out. We welcome you to attend. It's a great group of people, and you'll find you get good feedback on your cases, and it'll be a big learning opportunity for you. TCJ, as we call the journal, has been published as an online journal since 2004. It's now published through Emerald Publishing Group, but it distributes cases through the Emerald Publishing Hub and also through the Case Center. So you can find our cases. I just got a list in an email this morning of all the great cases that they had uploaded to the Case Center. So there are two ways to obtain cases from TCJ. Happily, Emerald provides a Best Case Award that carries a $1,000 prize. So if your case is accepted in the journal, you would be eligible for that prize. So the Emerald Best Case Award recognizes the case that was published in the previous year's volume of the journal and the very best case. So typically we recognize 3 finalists for the award, and then at the Case Association meeting we present the award to the winner. It's my favorite job of the whole year to be able to present the award to somebody that's really done a great job on their case. We publish 6 issues each year with between 35 to 40 cases annually. I know that Emerald would like me to get it up above 40. So, you can help me out with that if you submit your cases so we have more to consider. We'd be happy to publish above 40 cases if we can get 40 good quality cases. So, think about that as we go through this today. How can I get my case in the journal so I can qualify for the $1,000 prize? The TCJ is indexed in both Scopus and the Chartered Association of Business Schools. One of the challenges of case journals is that we don't get a lot of citations. People don't cite cases like they do empirical research work. And so a lot of the indices are based on citations. And so we wind up having challenges demonstrating the quality of our journal because we don't get citations. So know that we are considered one of the top journals in North America. It goes probably beyond that. TCJ is enjoying a really good reputation for quality cases, and we hope that you will consider sending your work our way so we can get above that 40 number. So next slide. These are the kinds of things that we publish. TCJ publishes traditional cases. We'll talk about what a traditional case is, but it's like the ones that you've seen in the Harvard Business Review, Harvard Publishing kind of cases, the longer cases. We also publish compact cases, and I'll define that in just a few minutes. And then I'm kind of keen to look for new forms. So far, nobody's surprised me yet, but I would love to be surprised with a format that perhaps is unique and innovative. So some of the things here would be like multimedia cases, cases that include a lot of video links. Raw cases are cases that often are supported by a website, and the information collection is one of the learning objectives of the case. So Yale does these, Yale University, and they typically are unfiltered reports that have come from industry sources and so forth. And so part of the learning objective is to have students critique those reports and establish which ones have the greater credibility and so forth and should be used in decision making. So it's a different type of case. So raw cases would be acceptable. Comic book cases or graphic novel type cases would be a delight. If you have that kind of capability, we would love to see those. And then finally, cases that are supported with websites where there might be video links or other things that supplement the case itself. So challenge me, submit something new and innovative, make me have to figure out how we're going to review this thing. We'd be delighted to see any kind of new ideas you have and would be pleased to feature them. And then finally, we publish articles, and we don't publish just any article. The articles need to be about case research, case writing, or case teaching. We publish these rarely, but we do publish articles that make a significant impact or have something new to say for those of us that are in the case writing community. So those are the kinds of things that we submit. We're a little broader in terms of what types of cases we publish. Our cases do not have to be decision focused. They can be illustrative or evaluative cases. They also do not have to be primary research. We publish a lot of really high quality secondary research cases, and we'll talk about some possible sources that you can use to gather information about your case situation and that are acceptable to us in our journal. So we're a good home for cases, so please, again, give some consideration to submitting your work to TCJ. With that, let's go to the next slide, and we get into compact cases. So first, let's define a case, and then we can talk more about what makes a case a compact case. One of the things that's fairly important for us to recognize is that cases are factual stories about actions that have happened in the past that prompt the reader to make decisions or perform analysis or evaluation. For TCJ, we want cases that are about real decision situations faced by real people in real companies. So everything about it is factual. Part of the reason we insist upon this is that we're trying to establish case research as a valid research outlet in the minds of our colleagues and our creditors. Excuse me. So we want to make sure that we are based in fact. There isn't any line of research that you could do where you get to make up your data. So we insist upon real cases, real people, and real decision situations. And so we wanted to make sure that that's clear. Fictionalized cases can't be published in the case journal. We do allow disguised cases, which is a whole different matter. So sometimes if you're writing about a business ethics kind of issue, you may want to disguise the name of the company or the names of the individuals to hide their identities. I mean, we don't necessarily want students emailing people and saying, oh, that was a really terrible thing you did. So we would maybe change the names or change the company. That's permitted, but changing the situation or inserting a character that was never there is not allowed. So please keep that in mind. So cases really have two parts, the case itself and the instructor's manual. So it takes the two pieces to create a publishable case. The purpose of the instructor's manual is to make sure that other people can teach the case as well as you can, but it's also to accommodate accreditors and others that are evaluating our work. Reviewers will use the instructor's manual to determine whether or not the case is going to be effective, and also to determine whether the case has sufficient information for students. So the instructor's manual will include things like the target audience, learning objectives, discussion questions and answers, and teaching strategies. And we'll talk all about those as we go through this short set of slides. So it takes the two pieces to make a publishable case. And one of the things I think a lot of new people in case writing find out is that in the review process, it's the instructor's manual that usually draws a great deal of attention. And so a lot of times in my past, when I've submitted cases, the case itself is deemed fine, but the instructor's manual will take a lot of the revision work. So just be prepared for that. All right, let's go to the next slide. We started compact cases at TCJ about 2015, mostly because we recognized that there were problems with case teaching. And the problem with case teaching was that students were coming to class completely unprepared to participate in a case discussion. My teaching experience was that sometimes students just skipped the case session. They didn't read the case, they didn't come to class, they kind of saw it as a throwaway and they would just skip. And so we wanted to find a way to make cases more engaging for modern students. And one of the things we found is if we shortened the case, the students could prepare better and would participate more actively in the discussion. Because we know if you start a case discussion and no one adds on or contributes, sorry, it would then be a problem because there's no learning that's going to happen. I mean, you could lecture your way through the case, but that really isn't the purpose. So we tried to create shorter cases to make them more compelling for students, more engaging, and to allow students to prepare better for the discussion. So a traditional case might be 12 to 15 pages of text with 5 to 6 learning objectives, but a compact case is only 1,000 words. When we started this process and we created the idea, I was challenged, can you write a case on strategic management in 1,000 words? And you know, one of the things, if you get to know me a little bit, you know that my husband says I'm stubborn, I say I'm persistent. If you say I can't do something, I'm pretty sure I can. So I took that as a challenge and I wrote a case that was 1,000 words that was a strategic management case. And I'm going to tell you, it teaches beautifully. It works so well. The students all read it. They come to class prepared. We have a great discussion. It's the same, you know, hour and 15-minute discussion we would have over a traditional case. It really doesn't suffer at all because it's so short. That's important for us to recognize because we are not simplifying cases to the extent that we've dumbed them down somewhat by making them shorter. We're still focusing on important issues that are relevant to the class, but we're just doing it in a very compact form. And so this little teeny weeny case, as you see in the diagram, is only about 2 to 3 pages of text. It's designed to be read in about 15 minutes. So sometimes you can even stand in the doorway of your classroom and pass out the case as students enter and say, hey, while you're waiting for everybody to get here, read this and we're going to discuss it today. It works really well that way. Other people use compact cases, as they call them, their back pocket cases. So they keep one available, and if the classroom discussion lags, or they, really just don't have an engaging experience for students that day, they whip the case out and say, okay, here, I'm going to pass it out, everybody read it, and then we're going to get together and have a discussion. And they work really well that way too. So the difference is mostly in the length of the case itself. So 2 to 3 pages of text, and with only 1 to 2 learning objectives. So they're a little more tightly wound, tightly focused than a traditional case, but you get the same kind of learning experience, the same kind of discussion out of a well-chosen compact case as you will out of a traditional case. How about the next slide, please? So this is a table that I'm kind of giving you a test run here. I'm writing a book on compact cases, and this is one of the tables I prepared for the book. And so I want to see how it works for today. So I'm giving you a test preview here. So looking at traditional and classic cases versus short or compact cases. Now, we call ours compact cases. Other people call theirs different things. Harvard got the best name of all, I think. They call theirs brief cases, which I think is pretty clever. But they all have kind of different requirements. But if we look at how these traditional or classical cases compare with our compact cases, what we find in terms of case focus, if you look at the blue on the right column, our short cases generally aren't trying to integrate all knowledge that the person has learned in their degree program. They're usually pretty focused tightly about specific issues. They have less of a comprehensive focus, but they're still dealing with real people and real firms facing real issues. Our case elements, we have kind of the same organization of cases, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, in terms of we provide some background, and our discussion of the protagonist or the main decision maker of the case is a little bit shorter, but otherwise they have the same components. So if you've written a traditional case, writing a compact case isn't all that different. The one thing that we do that not a lot of the other journals do is that we don't count the exhibits toward the word count. So our exhibits are used to substitute for some of the narratives. So if you want to give some company background and it's a deep history of all these things that they accomplished, why not put that in a timeline instead of putting it in a paragraph? So we are trying to expand the kind of exhibits that might be incorporated in case. And what you'll find is that if you're careful about choosing your exhibits, students will actually look at them. Instead of, if you think about in a traditional case, they typically will include financial statements. And I don't know about your students, but what mine do is they basically just turn the page when they hit those, don't even look at them. So what we're trying to do is to use things like infographics, for example, to grab the attention of the student and have the student really focus on the information's there. So we're not giving the full financials. We might just be highlighting some key areas and that are really important to the case itself. And if we can make the exhibits attractive enough, it helps supplement the narrative of the case and really works well in student learning. In terms of the length, as I said, our compact cases are usually less than 3 pages. Other people call their short cases about 5 pages, but ours are better, so just keep that in mind. So ours are designed to be read in 15 minutes or less. Our learning objectives are similar but fewer in number, generally less than 3 learning objectives in a compact case. And our discussion questions, because the case is shorter, it's more tightly focused, we usually have fewer discussion questions, but they're of the same kind that you might have in a traditional case. So those are the differences. Let's go on and we'll talk more about some of the similarities and the differences. So the first thing about compact cases is you have to have an idea. You have to have a good idea that will work in a short form. I think this is sort of funny because I recently tried to write a compact case and discovered that I had a good idea for a case, but it was not a good idea for a short case. It was a case that was going to involve stakeholder analysis, and there were too many stakeholders and they were too strange for me to get the narrative to work. And I kind of started out down the pathway writing and then realized, oh my goodness, I'm running out of words. How am I going to get this done? It wound up being a short case, not a compact case, but it's important that we have ideas that we think are going to work for a short case. So I gave a couple of ideas here for criteria that you might use. I basically get my ideas for short cases by reading newspapers and business periodicals, things that pop out to me that I think might be interesting and might work. And then I kind of think about these different areas here to determine whether or not it'll work. So the first one is, does it contribute to student learning? Does the idea relate to the key learning objectives of your course? So I read an article and I say, oh, this would be a good stakeholder analysis, or this would be a good pestle analysis, or this would be a good, whatever the key objectives of your course are. You kind of have to think about, where does this fit in my course? Excuse me. It might even help for you to think about what chapter of the book does it go with, you know, so that you can really get kind of specific in terms of your learning objectives. Is this case something I would use in my class? And so the idea sometimes will come from a newspaper article, and I'll look at it and say, could I use this in class? Yes, I can, and I move to the next one. So in terms of student engagement, will the students find the idea interesting, relevant, or engaging? And one of the things I think we have to remember is that we are typically nerdier than our students. So what interests me doesn't necessarily interest the student. So I have to kind of think about, you know, put myself in their position, their lifestyle, their kind of thinking, and would this be something that they would find appealing or interesting? It might be that it's one of the hot companies that, you know, everybody's talking about, and so that would make it more interesting, relevant, or engaging. Or it could be that it reveals something unexpected, that the case idea itself is something that's unusual, that will make it more interesting for students. Then we have to decide whether or not we can achieve it in a short case. So you know, it generally helps if you're picking from an industry or a company that students are already familiar with, because you don't have to explain all the deep, you know, detail that you might have if you chose something really unusual. So the example I usually use is, students understand the fast food industry pretty well because that's something in their experience. And so if I choose a case about a fast food company, I don't have to provide as much background. I don't have to explain the operations of the company, all of those things, because I expect that the students will be able to supplement my narrative by their own experience. They understand what a grocery store is. I mean, you know, all of those kind of things work fairly well. But if I choose something like lithium batteries, and I want to write about that, I have to explain now the manufacturing process and all sorts of things that are far more technical and detailed, and I can't do that in a short case. So choosing your company well is important. And then the last part is something a mentor of mine a long time ago taught me, is great cases sing. And so you have to ask yourself, will the case sing? And there are 4 attributes of singing here that we want to talk about. The first is problems. Does the case have a great issue or a problem that will generate good discussion? So, you know, will it generate the kind of discussion you want from your teaching? Does it have the right pieces for student engagement? So new and intriguing contacts, maybe teaching students something they don't know about a particular business will be part of the pieces that you collect. Third, does it have the right people? Does it have voices of real people to help bring the case to life? One of the things as case writers we find is if there's a person in the case, students will react to that person. So if it's somebody that they feel sorry for, they'll come up with recommendations to solve the problem. Or if it's a person that they hate, they'll say, well, I can do better decisions than that person, so I'm going to now go on my recommendations and really provide good, strong ones. If there's no people at all, students say, well, why am I reading this? You know, what do I care about here? I don't care about anything. So it helps to have people in the case. And in a compact case, that's a hard thing to do because you don't really have much time for character development. And if you're using secondary sources, what you hope is that the CEO or the character that you're going to put in the case talks a lot to the press so that you can use direct quotes from those press pieces, or if they're giving speeches on video, TED Talks and the like, you can use quotes from those to bring some life to the case and make it sing. And then the final thing of this will it sing is you have to have possibilities. Great cases allow multiple solutions. And in fact, students will surprise you sometimes by how creative they can be to develop a solution for a case. But if your case only allows one solution, you know, again, who cares? I mean, why am I reading this if it only has the one solution? If there's only one possibility, the case is not going to sing, and it's not going to be one of the great cases that we cite often and use frequently. So make your case sing and think about these ideas. And recognize that sometimes what works for a short case will not work for a long one, and vice versa. You know, it's always, you know, I start out thinking I'm going to write a short case or a compact case, and if it doesn't work for a compact case, I can still, you know, publish it as a traditional case, but you know, some ideas just don't work well in the short form because they're too complicated to accomplish in the word limits that we have. So let's move on to the next slide. This talks about the different sources of data that we might use to write our case. And typically it's been primary and secondary sources. And as I said earlier, TCJ is perfectly fine with all secondary source case research. But what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to use a combination of sources. We want to triangulate, and that's what this is trying to show. The convergence of evidence gives us more confidence that the situation is accurately described in the case. So primary sources would include interviews, field observations, and whatnot. Now, the issue with primary sourced cases is that you have to have a case release in order to publish that case. So if you've used any internal data that the company has provided, if you've walked through the company and taken a tour, you would have to have a signed release in order to publish that case. And that can sometimes be a problem because sometimes companies feel like you're giving away trade secrets and they don't want to sign the permission. So if you're going to go down the route of doing interviews and things like that, it's sometimes helpful to do a pre-release, getting them to acknowledge and participate in the case process so that you don't get too far down the line and then find out that they won't let you publish it. We typically use for compact cases a lot of secondary sources like newspapers, magazines, books, industry reports, things on the web that we found, external records, and so forth. So for a case that's based on a lot of secondary research, we'll have a lot of citations in the case itself so that we're crediting the source for the information that we're using. And we'll, you know, follow a traditional citation method. I use Citation Machine to do mine so that they're all consistent. And we will, you know, have a lot of footnoting and stuff in the case. So when we review specific numbers that came from our report, we'll provide a citation for it. In the middle there, we have a bit of a debate in the case writing community about these. I call them quasi-primary sources because they are real people saying real things and we're just watching them. So external videos, transcripts, court transcripts, congressional testimony, archives, and social media can all be used as sources for cases. Again, you're going to cite them that you've used them. But if you think about it, if I have a video of the CEO and he's giving a speech, I can see the look on his face when he says certain things, and I can describe that in the case. They are, in a sense, primary, but not fully primary because they're publicly available. So those can be really good sources to mine. We want them to kind of triangulate or converge with what we're finding in the secondary sources, but you don't need a case release for anything that's secondary source. So it can be a really good, these quasi-primaries and secondaries, a good way to go, especially if you're writing about something that might be controversial for the company. Business ethics cases typically are secondary sourced. If they're primary source, they're really hard to get approved for release. So, you might want to think about these different data sources and what they mean for you if you go down one path versus the other. Again, secondary sources, we can engage people if we can find quotes, if we can find them in print, if we can find them on video, if we can find social media tweets that the CEO might have done, you can use those. So all sorts of sources, but they should be telling the same story, and that's what we mean by convergence of the evidence. Next slide, please. All right, so here's a roadmap of what's in a compact case, the different components. So the first piece is the same, and if you've written cases before, it's the same thing. Same components, just different emphasis in a compact case. So the opening hook is where we set the stage and engage the students. It's called the hook because we're trying to hook the reader. We're trying to get them to read past the first paragraph. And so we want to set the stage. When is this case set? Where is it? What's the company? All those kind of things. But we also want to write it in an engaging way that intrigues the student to read further, so that there's an issue or a problem that is the focus of the case, and it's not resolved in this first paragraph, but we now are, have some sense of it, the problem's important, it needs to be resolved, and the students are intrigued enough that they want to read further. So that's the opening hook. Typically then we get an industry overview that provides the context and the competitive information in the second step. Some people switch that with the company story that comes third. Depends on whether you're a strategy person or you're writing from some other area, but generally we have to have some context for, perhaps this company is doing something that the competitors don't do, or that the competitors have done something and the focal company of the case needs to respond. That's the point of the industry overview. The company story is to provide context and background information that's unique to the firm. We need to have some sense of how the company operates in terms of philosophy. Are they customer oriented? Are they not customer oriented? Are they innovative? Those kind of things, because that provides the context for the decision itself. Company stories are easy to write a lot of times, and I could go on for pages and pages on some of these things because I find everything really kind of interesting, and I realize that not everybody needs to have as much background as I'd like to give them. And so this is one of the areas that we oftentimes have to be careful about. We have to choose the relevant background, not all background. We don't need to know, Ford Motors started with Henry Ford necessarily to understand what the issues are of Ford Motors today. So some of this might be primed for an exhibit, like the timeline I talked about earlier. So don't go too deep in the company story. Provide enough relevant facts that people have a sense of the company, but don't go too deep. Same thing with managers. The protagonists is how we humanize the case and make it interesting. So you don't have time in a compact case to have 15 protagonists. You're going to have to focus on a few key decision makers. I would say 2 to 3 at most in order to get within the compact case limits. We move on to a problem or case focus, describing the problem or issue to be addressed. The significance of the problem needs to be made clear. so that students realize this is a big deal. This is kind of a bet the company kind of deal that really has important ramifications for the company and really has to be addressed, some sense of urgency, if you will, so that students will not just punt it off and say, well, they can deal with that next year. We really want them to kind of feel the concerns of the protagonists and why they feel it's important to move forward on this particular issue or problem. Finally, then we get to the closing hook, and the closing hook is where we bring the curtain down with a call to action. Basically, it's the ending of the case, and it's usually a paragraph or less in a compact case, but it kind of goes back to the opening hook and echoes some of the issues of the opening hook in a way that it's clear that the case is ending. What you don't want is to have people flipping through pages thinking, is this case done? Did it just trail off? Where's the end of the case? So you want to make sure that you remind people what the problem or issue is that they're supposed to address. And then finally, we have the exhibits, and we can take all sorts of exhibits in terms of screenshots of social media posts and things like that, as well as tables, charts, diagrams. Again, think about the relevance. Not everything, some people write cases with red herrings, and what they're trying to do is to get students to discern what's important and what's not important. That could be an objective of a case, but it probably won't be an effective objective of a compact case because, again, you don't really have a lot of narrative words to spend on things that aren't important to the issues. So you want to choose things and make them as appealing to students as you can so that they actually look at the exhibits and consider the data in the exhibits as part of their raw material that they're using as they analyze the case. And that's basically a compact case. So if you look at it, it's the same as a traditional case. The opening hook and the closing hook become really critically important in setting the stage and so forth. But the biggest section of the case is probably the problem case focus, where you'll write maybe a whole page on that in order to provide enough information for students to make decisions. Let's move on. So the other piece of the case, as we said earlier, was the instructor's manual or the teaching note. And this lists the key components and the audiences for those. So instructor's manuals, the audiences include you, the case writer, the instructors that are going to teach your case after it's published, and evaluators. And the evaluators, there's two types of evaluators here that we might want to think about as we write instructor's manual. One is the reviewers for the journal. If you're going to seek publication, they'll use the instructor's manual. And in fact, some of them will read the instructor's manual first before they start the review to see what your intent is. What are you trying to do with this case? And they will kind of evaluate the case based on, does it do what you say it should do? And so the reviewers pay a lot of attention to instructors' manuals. And then the other evaluators are accreditors. So in a lot of schools, we're accredited by AACSB International, and they look at the instructor's manual as the scholarly part of case writing. And so you want to be able to have your case considered as a valid scholarly contribution. It's the instructor's manual that does that. So you want to pay attention to the instructor's manual for that reason as well. Now, how does it help you as a case writer to write an instructor's manual? And the primary thing for compact cases is that I usually recommend that people start with learning objectives first, because the learning objectives determine what goes in the case and what does not go in the case. So, if I'm focusing on a particular type of analysis that I want students to do, I have to provide enough information so they can do that kind of analysis. And so it becomes a really kind of convenient way to pare down your case and get it focused on those things that are important, because you say, do I need this for the learning objectives? No, I don't, so it can go out. But if it's critical for me to have a particular type of information in order to have the students learn what I want them to learn, then I have to, find a way to include that in the case. So let's look at the components. So and I would recommend that you put them in the order that I've listed them here, and there's a reason for that, and I'll get to that in just a minute. So we start with a synopsis or a case summary, about a paragraph that describes what the case is about. It may describe what kind of analysis, the case requires. It's important because it's one of the things that adopting instructors will read and decide whether or not they're going to use your case in class by your description that you've provided in the synopsis. The second piece is the target audience and intended courses. Here we're describing, is it undergraduate, is it graduate, is it executive level students that you're intending for this case? And then what courses can it be used in? And a lot of times reviewers will pay attention to this in terms of, is it complex enough for a graduate discussion, or is it too simplistic and it might be better at the undergraduate level? So you want to describe the target audience. A nice value add piece on this is if you not only say, okay, it could be used in an entrepreneurship course, and you tell them what topics it might be best covered first, and then your case could fit in this particular section of the course. The learning objectives, and we're going to only have about 3 of them at most with a compact case, and then we list the discussion questions. And the discussion questions you could probably have with 3 learning objectives, maybe 4 or 5 most in terms of discussion questions, but it would probably be okay to have only 3. So the green, the reason I use different colors here, the green is what the adopting instructors are going to read. So if you think about it, this is the marketing for your case. This is how you're getting people to use your case. You're saying, oh, my case is so great because it can do all these things. It can be used in these classes and so forth. So the reason I recommended that you keep things in this order is a lot of times that's all they read, and they make a decision whether to use your case or not based on those 4 key areas of the instructor's manual. Now, the section that's written in black, that's usually what the evaluators read, and that they're concerned about, the quality of your case and its research contribution and so forth. So we get the theory discussion. And now this is kind of a sensitive area. There are some theories that are so well known that you really don't need to include them in the theory discussion section. So for example, if you teach strategy, everybody pretty much knows Porter's 5 forces. So you don't really need to explain that in the theory discussion section. What you do need to explain is anything that's unique or novel or perhaps rarely used in your discipline and how it applies to the discussion. And it's kind of helpful if you provide readings, for example, for the instructor that they can use to get up to speed on something like guerrilla marketing that isn't that commonly covered in textbooks. Think about, helping that new instructor, that person that's never taught before, teach your case as effectively as you can. Excuse me. So provide some good suggestions for them. Then we get to the answer to the discussion questions. You listed them out in the first part, but now you have to provide complete answers to them. One of the things that will get your case turned back when it's submitted is if you don't answer the discussion questions, or if you raise more questions in your answers to the discussion question than you actually answered. So you want to provide complete answers to the discussion questions. There's some debate in the case writing community about whether these should be from the instructor's perspective or whether they should be, what do students say when you ask these questions? And you will find that people like both. So you might answer correctly, this is what the theory suggests should be the approach that the company should do, but students will typically say whatever they might typically say. Or sometimes you'll find that people will answer the discussion questions, they'll say, top students will notice this, and they will go in this direction with their analysis, whereas average students probably will miss that key point and they will either make a mistake or they will go in a different direction. And that's helpful to the instructor to know, okay, if everybody's going off in this different direction, perhaps I need to refocus them a little bit. Perhaps I need to highlight something that will draw them in what the top students are supposed to recognize. We also provide a teaching strategy, and so this is oftentimes like a teaching plan. How long does it take to establish key points in the analysis? When should I shift from one area to another? Some people will provide, what do you write on the board? If you're using the 3-board method that Harvard uses, what do those boards look like? Different kinds of things. If you show any video clips, this is a good place to say, okay, this is the video I usually show. Video clip, it lasts 2 minutes. And this is the one that I use to introduce the case, and then at about the midpoint, then I show this one, and that really helps people teach your case really well. If you have any kind of activities, role plays, and so forth, this is where you would describe them in the teaching strategy section. And then the student response can be taken 2 ways. One is you might include student responses in the answer to the discussion questions. So you might omit the student response section entirely because you've already done it. Or you can talk about what the reaction was of the students to the discussion itself. Were they engaged? Did they stay with it? Were there any particular hot spots or points that we might want to be careful about as we teach this case? Those kind of things can be useful. And then finally, an epilogue. And you only include the epilogue if you know what happened in the case. So let's go to the next slide. I promise you I don't have that much more. So this is about pedagogical usage, and it's contrasting what novices do versus experienced case writers. So novices want to do the Swiss Army knife of cases. Their case can be used for everything. Every course ever taught, ever thought about. And so they really tried to increase adoptions by making it a multi-purpose tool. That generally backfires. And the reason it backfires is that if you say this case can be used in 15 courses, the reviewers are going to say, prove it. And they're going to want you to explain how it can be used in all those courses. Your better strategy would be to write as an expert case writer and take the picnic cheese knife here approach, where you have a case focused on one course, and this is how it's used in that course. Now, make sure you pick a course that's generally, widely offered. If you pick a really narrow course that perhaps your institution offers but nobody else does, your adoptions will be pretty small. Next slide. The thing that reviewers look for is an alignment between the case and the instructor's manual. So effective cases achieve balance. So they want to make sure that the learning objectives can be accomplished by the case. They want to make sure that the theory supports the case and that the discussion questions and answers can be answered by the data in the case. What typically happens is the instructor manual will typically include information that is not in the case. And we don't really like to have the instructor be the only person that knows certain facts about the case. So a lot of times you'll find in reviews, the reviewer will say, this information should be in the case. And so when you do your next revision, you want to make sure you move that from the instructor's manual. The case itself is supposed to be self-contained. It's supposed to have all the information the students need to answer or address the issue, and you want to make sure it's there. Next slide. This is not the TCJ review process. So I think it's kind of funny because a lot of people are used to being beat up in the review process, and they expect that that's just typical in academia. TCJ sees itself as a developmental journal, and so we're used to having new people coming into the journal and submitting cases, and that there will be problems with those cases. And we are willing to work with people to try to improve the case and get it to the point where it can be published. So you do not have to run down the gauntlet. You'll find that you'll get constructive feedback from our reviewers, and that they will have your best interest in mind. They want you to publish your case, and they're going to provide specific feedback to help you do that. Next slide. So this is what the publication process looks like. So the case comes in at the top, and I do a quick review of the case and decide whether it's okay, it fits the aspects of the journal, or it doesn't. If it doesn't, I send a reject right away. Not very many of those, but a lot of times it's because like we'll get medical cases. I got a case, one submission, it was a picture of an eyeball, and that was it. Not something that we wanted to deal with, so I rejected that one. Once we decide it's okay, then we assign reviewers. It takes a while for the reviewers to accept. If we typically will use 2 reviewers on each case, saving the 3rd reviewer for tie breaks or situations where we feel like we need to get another opinion. We send it out. They have about 45 days to complete their review. Sometimes it takes longer. I got to tell you, COVID is really making it hard for both reviewers to respond and also for them to complete reviews. Once I get the 2 reviews back, then I have to decide. So I'm at the diamond where it says editor decides. Very rarely we accept a case on the first round. I have done it once in my probably 6 years as an editor, but it happens. And then you would get an accept letter and be told how to get it ready for publication and so forth. But typically the middle 2 options, either you get a major revision or a minor revision. A major revision means that we really want to see a rewrite of major sections of your case or your instructor's manual, and we do not expect you to return the revision within weeks, well, within days. I mean, I have had people like 2 days later send me a version of the case, and we're pretty sure that it didn't encompass all the changes that were requested. So take your time, make a good effort on your revision, because what will happen if you don't is it'll keep getting returned for a major revision. And at some point, the reviewers will give up and they'll say, we have pushed this author as far as we can. We don't think this case is publishable any longer. They haven't responded to the things we've asked them to do. And so that will sometimes trigger a reject. Minor revisions are typically grammatical changes, maybe switching some sections around, but the case itself is in pretty good shape. The instructor's manual has everything that it needs, and we're tweaking it, if you will, making some changes. And that generally, we want to do one minor revision and then do an accept. So those are the different ones. We do reject cases. And again, it depends on your response to the revisions that you're asked to make. If you stop making changes and the reviewers are saying, hey, I told you in the last round of review that I wanted this fixed and you didn't fix it, at some point we give up and we say, okay, we've done as much as we can. The authors aren't responding the way we had hoped they would, and we will do a reject at that point.
I think just also, sorry, Rebecca, I just wanted to pick up on the first point around the case submission as well. I think it's just also really important to stress that you have to make sure when you're submitting there is a case, a teaching note, and any consent forms included. Otherwise, the case will be unsubmitted. I know it seems obvious, but it's surprising how many cases we get submitted that don't have those 3 documents that we require.
Yes, that is important. And, our goal is to publish as many cases as we can, but you have to work with us on this in order to get cases in the right format and in the, respond to the reviewers in order to get an acceptance. So I think I'm at the end. Yep. This is my contact information if you want to contact me, and we'll put that back up later. All right, okay, so Juliet, it took up a lot of time, sorry.
Oh, don't worry, it was a fantastic presentation, Rebecca, so thank you so much. And I'll whiz through my slides because I know we've got a couple of questions for Rebecca in the chat. So again, this is just a reminder of the scope of the case journal and the types of cases that we accept. I've included a link to the author guidelines so that if you're interested in submitting a case, you can take a look at those author guidelines, which go into a little bit more detail on some of the points that Rebecca talked through today. And also there's a link to the submission page there. So if we go to the next slide. I also just wanted to flag that in addition to the fantastic presentation that Rebecca's given today, we also have some really great support resources on our Cases Hub. So it's a completely free resource. You just need to go online and register an account, and it provides lots of interactive content designed for people who are new to case writing and teaching, as well as more experienced case writers. So we have ones on writing with case studies, teaching with case studies, and learning with case studies. So there is a little video that gives an overview. I think we're a bit short on time, Andrea, so we'll skip that video for now, but we will share this deck after the session, so you can take a look at that video at your leisure. So if we just go on to the next slide. So what I wanted to flag again is as you go into the writing with case studies module, these are the different sections that you can see, and each of them has video content that you can watch, and then there's questions you can consider. And what usually happens is there are text boxes where you can add your comments as you go through the different sections of the modules, and then you can print and download the notes that you've made. So it's a really, really interactive resource and very, very easy to use. So if we go on to the next slide. I've also just wanted to flag that within the Cases Hub, we have a useful resources section. So I've included some screenshots so you can see where it appears. So once you've registered an account, if you go to the library and then useful resources, you can see that there's a sample case and teaching notes section. And within that, we have a sample case called Sorry, No Carnitas, Balancing Food with Integrity and Growth at Chipotle. And that was actually written by Rebecca, I believe, and is a compact case. So it's a really good example for you to take a look at. We've got the associated teaching notes that sit alongside that. So if you're not sure about how to structure a teaching case and you want to see an example of what a good compact case looks like, do take a look at those resources. So next slide. So finally, just a quick overview of the submission process for the competition. As Rebecca noted, we welcome submissions of compact cases and they need to be read in approximately 15 minutes to support classroom discussion. I won't go into too much detail on the next point as Rebecca's covered that in quite a lot of detail, but just to flag that the prize fund is $2,000, so $1,000 for first place, $500 each for second and third, and the submission deadline is currently the 1st of October. So I've included the link to the submission page again, but I just wanted to flag that when you register your accounts on the submission site, if you can select the TCJ Compact Case Competition, we can make sure any submissions are fielded to that competition so they don't get lost in the submission process. It's fairly obvious when you go to submit, you should be able to see that. And in terms of article or case type, you just need to select compact case as well, and we'll make sure they all get categorized in the right way. So I think that's everything from me. So we've just got time, Andrea, to go through the couple of questions that we got in the chat, I think.
Yep, so we just had a few questions. So what is the review timeline for short cases?
Unfortunately, not as short as I'd like it to be. Again, COVID has really made it difficult for us. They go through the same process as our traditional cases do. And we try to get feedback to authors within 30 to 45 days.
Great. And do open access doctoral dissertations documenting historic events qualify as quasi-primary or secondary sources?
Because they're publicly available, I would probably cite them as quasi-primary. I mean, you would have to cite in the specific dissertation that you were using as support for your case. It would not require a release because, again, it's a public document.
Okay, and can a published case be rewritten as a compact case with significant changes and submitted for review?
We've had that question, yeah, quite consistently. Sorry, go on, Rebecca.
We have seen that, but I think it generally does not work well because the focus of a compact case is typically very different than the focus of a full-fledged case. And what tends to happen is it's really hard to strip it out and get it down to the particular issues and problems that you're going to cover, and they just don't work. So We generally recommend that people not do that. I mean, you might be extremely gifted at it and perhaps it will work, but our experience has been that it does not work very well.
Okay, and can you tell us, are we mandatory? Sorry, let me just rephrase that. Can you tell us, are we mandatory compelled to show objection letter from the company whose name will be used in the case? So do we have to submit an objection letter from, do we have to show an objection letter from the company whose name will be used in the case?
Only if you're using primary sources. Secondary source cases, you're using publicly available information and you're protecting yourself by citing all the publicly available information you're using. You know, one of the things that you'll find is that to make your case sing, you want to present both sides of an issue. So, for example, I wrote a case on Nike, and it was about sweatshop labor. And you want to present both sides of that issue. So here's the company's perspective on it, and here's what the consumers are saying. If you do that in a fair and objective way in the case, that works generally pretty well. The students then can take both perspectives and say, what's right about this perspective? What's right about this other perspective? The Nike case, I sent it to the company afterwards. It was based all on secondary sources. And they came back to me and said, could we use this when we go out and speak to college campuses? So to me, that was a huge endorsement that they thought I treated them fairly. And that's generally what we want, is to treat the companies fairly, present both sides of the issues without getting them, you know, really embedded in a way that, you know, is opinionated. We want to just fairly present multiple perspectives. That helps the case sing. And then we want the students to figure out which one do they favor, which one do they think is really the situation, or how might the company address these consumers that are really upset about certain things, and how might they address that?
Okay, so I think we've actually run out of time now. We do have another couple of questions, but we'll respond to you directly. But I just want to say thank you, everybody, for attending the webinar, and thank you to Rebecca and Juliet for presenting. And we hope you found this session useful, and we'll send the slides and a recording of the webinar to you shortly. So you'll have all the information and all the links and everything.
And submit your cases.
Please submit cases. I gotta get over my 40 numbers.
See you later.
Great, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.